So I wanted to do another video for this mitre saw that Ozito's got, and I wanted to compare the saw blades that I found at Bunnings at the hardware store that fit this saw. It has a 30mm arbor, so if you ever go get a saw, this or another blade for this saw, you need to get one that has a 30mm arbor. I made a mistake and brought home that Irwin with the 25mm arbor, tried to fit it to the thing and it didn't actually work, so I ended up boring out the center hole. I wouldn't recommend anybody doing it. I had to bore out the center hole of the Irwin blade to make it fit. It fit and it worked, so I got lucky, but I wouldn't recommend anyone do it. But I just wanted to do another video because I absolutely love using this tool. I think it's super compact. It's really light. It does everything it's supposed to do. I've used it so many times on different tasks and different jobs, and it's come in handy. You know, people they don't realize that you've just pulled out a drop saw from the back of your truck and throw a battery on it in the corner, and all of a sudden you've got a bunch of timbers that are or trims that are cut up nice and straight, nice and clean, and it's just a really handy tool to have as a backup. Here I've got the 24 tooth dewalt blade. Now that blade is actually a table saw blade, so how that affects the dynamics of its cutting performance, I'm not sure, but this thing still performed really well. It just, like as you tell then, I just pushed it a little bit too hard in that video and in that section, and it actually just cut out. So honestly, the saw hasn't cut out on me that much. When you're cutting, I'm cutting a 90 by 45 piece of timber there, a treated piece of timber. So it's a decent chunk of timber. It's not huge, but it's a standard, it's a commonly used piece of timber if you're going to be doing some framing, you know, or some deck work or anything like that, you know. So just, you know, I mean, I've cut tree branches, small tree branches with this thing because I could, I guess, to suit a fire pit or a fireplace, and it's just come up so well. One of the biggest probably complaints I have about it is refitting the blades. Getting them out's fine. I find that trying to get the blade back in, I actually have to cut the video short, because trying to get them in, you've got to get it in the perfect angle or the perfect slot, because there's a couple of little notches that sit inside that casing that make it a little bit tricky to refit. But you get it there in the end, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, you're not changing blades that often anyway. Once you put the right blade on there, you're going to be using it for ages. I mean, that dewalt blade I used for ages. Now we're going back to the Ozito, which I've used a few times, probably not as much as the dewalt. The dewalt's probably slightly worn. But after changing from the dewalt back to the Ozito blade, I noticed the quality of cut that the Ozito has is very impressive. They've provided a really decent quality blade on this tool, and it does a really nice cut. It does sort of, for some reason, it was almost scoring the top of the timber. This is a bad angle, but I do another video afterwards with the Ozito, and it shows it's got a better angle. But I was noticing here, I just wanted to sort of show you guys that it was scoring the top of the timber as I was coming in, and I wanted to check to make sure that the blade was straight, and it was. It just didn't like the timber at that stage. Obviously, when you want to change the blade or check the blade, you want to remove the battery every time. You don't want to accidentally trigger the thing. A nice thing about these tools is you'll find that they have the trigger that you use to start the tool has an on switch. So if you plug your battery into one of the tools, whether it be the grinder or the drop saw or even I'm sure the Circ saw, pull the trigger the first time and it doesn't do anything, but it actually engages the battery. So that must be some kind of battery saving technology, because it must disengage the battery if it's on the tool for a long period of time. and then when you go to pull the trigger, sometimes you'll find that it won't turn the tool on straight away, but the second time you pull it, it will. That's basically engaging the on switch the first time you pull it. So one of the subscribers wanted to know if it did a 45-degree angle on a 90 by 45, and I wanted to show that here it does. It only just reaches that bottom back corner and cuts it. Look, sometimes it doesn't. I find that really strange, but sometimes it couldn't get right into the corner and cut that bottom back corner off. But it can do it. It doesn't like it that much. Obviously on the 45 tilt, there's a fair bit going on. There's a lot of resistance, and it slows down the cutting performance by a little bit, but it still does it pretty well. As long as you don't push too hard, it gets there in the end. So here's that Irwin blade I was talking about. This one had, so this one has a 25mm arbor, so you can't, so it won't bolt straight on. And I just didn't even look at that, and I thought it would fit, so I tried to put it on and scratch the plate up. So I couldn't return it, so I thought, well, I might as well bore it out, and made it fit. And it actually did a pretty good job, because it's well balanced. Like, it doesn't create. I was worried it was going to cause some vibration in the motor when I turned it on, but it didn't, and it sits pretty well in the Circ saw. So the Ozito blade's a 40 tooth blade, and the Irwin and the dewalt are 24 tooth, because I kind of just wanted to use them for, faster cutting. I wanted to just cut through timber as quick as possible. I couldn't really say that the quality of cut isn't as nice as the 40 tooth, even if you don't push as hard. I can't say that on this saw there's a little bit of a difference between your 40 tooth to 24 tooth. Like, on this drop saw, you notice there's a little bit of a difference, but not much at all. To be honest, I actually found out that the Ozito blade probably cuts better, and it's actually nicer to use. It was actually a more comfortable blade to use. And it's not thinner. It's not a thinner kerf, or it's not a thinner blade at all. They're all the same width. But as you can tell, the Irwin blade blitzes through the timber really nicely. I've sped the video up by 2 times, so most of what you see here is all double the speed of what it would normally cut. But as you can tell, this thing does a great job as well. And I wanted to test this on the 45 tilt as well to see how it performs, and it's got a nice little lock-in bracket at the back there, lock-in lever at the back. The actual dust port does do a pretty good job. I was impressed with how much dust I didn't have flying around. So sometimes I did a couple of cuts where I forgot to turn the vac on, and I realised how much of a mess I made. But then plug the vac in, and it does take in quite a bit of the shavings. I was pretty impressed by how well it did, actually. So here we've got a few straight cuts, a few 45 cuts. I'll do a tally at the end of all the cuts that we get through. So I mean, the Irwin blade, I think it was about $25, maybe $30. I believe that the dewalt blade was about a $34, $40 blade. And again, the Ozito blade that came with it does a fantastic job. I'm pretty surprised, because normally you buy the tools and you find that the actual blades or accessories that comes with it aren't always the best, and you've got to go buy replacements. But this saw definitely, with the original blade and everything, is just perfect. Straight out of the box, this thing is ready to go, and it can do a lot of work. I mean, You know, I've done heaps of different silly things with it, and it just keeps chopping. It doesn't stop. I've only ever used it on a 3 or a 4 amp hour. I do need to get myself a 5 amp hour because people do say that you get a lot more performance out of it. And I will be interested to see how that performs. I wanted to go back to the dewalt blade here because it has. I didn't do any 45 cuts on the first part, so I'll just do a couple of straight cuts with this one, and then do a few 45s and see how it goes. Also, from the price point, you can tell the motor is a decent quality. It's quiet. It has enough torque to keep up with your lever speed, like with how hard you're pushing. Your your soft start motor to that engine brake as well. That just proves that there's quality. There's quality sort of assurance that's gone into the product itself. Even the whole frame, the casing, everything about it, you would never think that it would be around $100 for this particular tool. Like I said, it hasn't failed me. It hasn't ever done anything that I didn't want it to do. And every now and then when I use it, it impresses me every time. You know, you can tell by the ribbing through the actual housing on the rear arm. That's really solid. The plastic casings that are around it, again, super solid. That black housing on the side there, that's removable. So if you ever need to either pull the motor out or replace your bushes, you could probably do that. And there you go, that's the dewalt. That's a dewalt with the 45. Now, honestly, I really wanted to go back to the Ozito blade because I found it was the best one to use. And after those 30 or so cuts, I think it is, I've still got 2 bars left on a 4 amp hour battery. So let's go back to the Ozito blade, and it's got a really nifty removable tool at the back. It sits on the back of the handle, and then there's a little lever at the front where you push down to. It allows you to get into the to lock in your position, so you can easily undo it, and then that little lug nut goes straight back in and locks in nice and tight. You got to remember to turn the that little nut to hold it in goes the opposite way. So it's right is loose and left is tight, because that's the way that the rotation of the blade, so that way it doesn't come loose while you're using it. Now here I want to put a long piece of timber with the actual bracket on there to see if it holds, and it does. I mean, I reckon I've probably still got about 2 meters left, or just over 2 meters left on that 90 by 45. So it's a heavy piece of timber. It's a big length, and you can clamp it down and it'll still hold nicely. I mean, the way that this blade cuts, it was actually cutting better the second time. It was leaving a much nicer finish on the timber. I mean, one day I'd love to try I think Diablo do a nice 40 tooth Mitre Saw blade. I think a Diablo will probably show a bit of difference in terms of its quality and its prestige, because it does, that stuff's been engineered really, really well. But look at that, like, it's a very smooth finish. You could obviously get it even a better finish than that if you put, masking tape around. If you're trying to make a nice, really, really tight finish, you can put some masking tape around the piece of timber, and then that way, when you cut through the shavings, it doesn't burr out, it doesn't spur out at all. It sits nice and tight. So even with the lockable arm on there to lock down your timber, you can still do a full tilt 45. It's always good to remember to lock the blade in when you do the 45. I think this is one where I didn't, which can be dangerous, but nothing bad happened, which is good. As soon as I cut through the timber, I realised it was loose, which was silly on my behalf. So yeah, so you can still cut with that timber locked in. So perfect for if you're going to be doing, trims or deck or floorboards or anything like that is going to really sit nice. And that 45 was practically perfect. So that was two pieces of timber cut at 45, put them together, see how they look, and that's really tight. I reckon you can make a really nice tight fit there. The best thing to do is, when you're using a saw like this, is your safety side of things. Always wear your gloves, put on some glasses, make sure there's no one. If you're using it around the house, make sure your kids aren't running around you doing anything silly. Or your mates are hanging around you doing anything silly, because things can go wrong pretty quickly or go bad pretty quickly if you don't use it correctly. Keep your hand well away from the blade. And make sure you always, safety is #1 priority when you're using tools like these, because you kind of forget how easily you can hurt yourself when you do the wrong thing. So I will say it again, that the actual Ozito blade, it's an absolute pleasure to use. It cuts really, really well. Disperses the cuttings very quickly and very easily. The vac comes in very handy and keeps all the dust, or as much dust as possible, away. You still get a bit of mess flying out from the sides, but it's not too bad at all. So here we've got a couple of bars left still, and just a couple of those cuts that I just did, they were super thin, and I was impressed with how precise each cut was. Those pieces of timber were only about a millimetre and a half or 2 mil thick, and right on that edge, it didn't buckle at all. It didn't buckle, and it didn't create any chips, and it cut that really nicely. So you can see there's a heap of cuts there. I'll count them up in a second. If you own Ozito stuff, give us a thumbs up. I think it's pretty cool what they're doing, and the product they're using. I know that Iron Hell are going to bring out more things, and I believe that Iron Hell may have created a partnership between Ozito, or Iron Hell has either bought Ozito or something like that. Not too sure about the politics, but yeah, look how thin that is. Like that's probably about 3 or 4 mil. This one here is a little bit thinner again, but look how nice that cut is. It's just super tight. So it goes to show you can use this for precision work if you need to, as long as you take appropriate care, and the right precautions. So look at that. That'll be a millimetre and a half thick. That one's even thinner, but I snapped it because it was so thin. It's like paper thin. I picked it up and it broke. But it just shows how good the blade and the saw is. So here we got about, I think it's about 85 cuts, straight cuts there, and plus a few more that I didn't actually keep the timbers for, and I cut the timbers in half. Still got 1 bar left. It was flashing when it was on the tool, so it would have only had a few, maybe another 10 or so cuts, and they would have started to cut a little bit slowly. There you go, 88 cuts, straight cuts. at 90 degrees and 14 bevel cuts at 45. Like I said, this saw doesn't really like the 45 tilt cut, but it still does it if you just take your time with it. It manages to do a pretty good job and get it done nicely. It's a great little saw. Stick with the original blade until it dies or it burns out, or you notice that it starts burning the timber. That's when you kind of know when you need to replace them. But I reckon this blade will last for many cuts, honestly. So if you like what you see, give us a thumbs up, and if you want to see more stuff, please subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.